Good afternoon, all. Welcome. Give folks just a minute to trickle in and we'll get started with our webinar today. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. Thank you all once again for joining us. My name is Ryan Rotundo. I'm the Director of Programs with the National Down Syndrome Society. We're very excited to have you all here this afternoon for our webinar, The Importance of Employment and Other Engaging Daytime Activities for Adults with Down Syndrome. Thank you again for joining us. We'll let folks sort of trickle in, and if you would like to introduce yourselves in the chat, maybe list your name and any organizational affiliation, kind of where you're coming from today during our webinar, feel free to do so. Want to just mention that NDSS believes that employment, volunteering, and other daytime activities are important aspects of a person's life and overall well-being. While everyone's journey will look different, we truly believe that all individuals with Down syndrome can be active participants in their local communities. And this webinar is going to explain some of what these activities are and the impact that they can have on an individual's life. Today's discussion will really dive into the importance of studying employment and engaging activities for people with Down syndrome, uncovering some preliminary findings from an NIH study called Project Aspire, which you can find on our website, and you will get to hear more about, of course, today in the webinar from the researchers themselves. We're also looking to identify the remaining knowledge gaps that need to be addressed. Given how little employment-related research exists about people with Down syndrome, we're really excited that today's webinar presenters are conducting research to benefit the Down syndrome community and sharing these findings with us. Before we dive into the content of today's webinar, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping items to ensure that everyone has an enjoyable experience and that everyone feels they have access to the content of this webinar and some of the features that are built into the platform today. So one, if you experience any technical issues during the webinar, please use the chat function to notify our support team, and they'll be sure to do their best to assist you as promptly as possible. Also, there will be a Q&A session toward the end of today's webinar. Hopefully, we'll have some time in there for some great questions and conversation. We encourage you to submit your questions using the Q&A feature located near the bottom of the screen. We will do our best to answer as many of these questions as possible throughout the day or throughout today's webinar and during the designated Q&A time. Also, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available for future viewing on the NDSS website. With that, I also want to mention that quickly our website is www.ndss.org, and you can certainly visit that and check out some of our other programs and offerings at any point today or in the future. Thank you again for your attention, and we hope that you enjoy today's webinar. We'll go to the first slide, please. Or the next slide. We'll go one more. So the National Down Syndrome Society has been around for several decades now. We're celebrating our 44th anniversary. In fact, yesterday was NDSS Day, so we celebrated our 44 years yesterday. We've been around since 1979. The National Down Syndrome Society's mission is to empower individuals with Down syndrome and their families by driving policy change, providing resources, engaging with local communities, and shifting public perceptions. Our offices were formerly headquartered in New York City. We now have a headquarter office in Washington, D.C. to do just this work, influencing policy change and being close to some of the greatest decision makers in our country to be able to advance policies and continue to move the needle for the greater Down syndrome community. Research like what we will be discussing today is so vitally important to NDSS's mission because it helps to support policy change, resource development, and some of these public perceptions that we are talking about. Some of the data that we have seen recently in the Down syndrome community still falls short in helping us understand the employment needs of the community that we serve. So the research that we're seeing now that you're going to hear about is, again, very exciting because it's in some ways uncharted territory. And as we look at the lifespan of individuals with Down syndrome increasing over time, there is quite a bit of research that you may think of being a needle stick or a blood sample, looking at kind of this health research related to aging or Alzheimer's. And again, these are very important areas of study. We also want to look at some of these other quality of life measures that impact a person with Down syndrome's life in the earlier stages as well. So looking at employment is a very key and unique piece that we get to look at, and you're going to hear more from some current researchers today. Next slide, please. So I want to talk just quickly about some of the National Down Syndrome Society's core programs. So one of the ways that we really impact the community is through these three buckets, these three areas: resources and support, advocacy and policy, and community engagement. Within resource and support, we do have a 1-800 helpline that individuals can call with questions, concerns, just inquiries about loved ones with Down syndrome, or just Down syndrome in general. We might have folks from different areas of study or different professions. We even have businesses that call in saying, I want to hire somebody with Down syndrome, don't know where to start. Can you give me some advice? So a great resource there, as well as a number of digital and print or digital and downloadable resources that we share and take with us to different conferences and events that talk about lifespan, everything from birth to end of life, as well as specifics having to do with employment, education, the learning profile of individuals with Down syndrome, again, Alzheimer's and aging, and others. The education, employment, and health and wellness programs within our greater offering are also staffed by subject matter experts. So we have a tremendous team that really put together these pieces for our community, which is a great value add. Under advocacy and policy, we do work at the federal, state, and local level, or federal, state, and our grassroots efforts to really empower the community, providing educational opportunities as well as advocacy opportunities. A tremendous program that we have, our Down Syndrome Ambassador program, where we're really preparing and also listening to individuals from the community about issues that are most important to them at a local or state level relative to policy. We are also looking at ways that we can influence, as I mentioned, federal policy. We've had some success here recently in getting Down syndrome included in NAPA reauthorization, which was a big win for us just a couple of days ago, last week, in fact. And so there are a number of things that we do at the federal level that are, again, impacting the Down syndrome community in a very positive way. Also thinking about community engagement. So we have scholarships, grants, different awards that are available to individuals with Down syndrome, or even sometimes families maybe looking to pursue post-secondary education for their loved one with Down syndrome and other areas of life. We also have our National Buddy Walk, which is something that we've been doing for many years, and you'll see buddy walks taking place in communities around the country, usually during the months of September or October, National Down Syndrome Awareness Month, and some other really great opportunities for us to engage with the community through different fundraising efforts and events that we host throughout the year. I do want to make a quick plug, and you'll hear a little bit more about it at the end. One of the things that we're going to be doing in November is our Adult Summit, so keep your ears open for that information as we conclude our presentation today. Next slide, please. So I will take a moment here to acknowledge and pass this over to our incredible Senior Manager of Employment Programs, Miss Amanda Ryu.
Hi, everyone. Amanda here. Thank you again so much for joining today's webinar. Really excited to have you all here. I promise I'll keep this brief because there's definitely a lot I could tell you about the NDSS employment program, but at its core, we are tackling all the different points you see here, things related to employment policy and advocacy, resource development. If you've not had a chance and opportunity already to check out the employment resources available on the NDSS website, I would highly encourage you to do so, and we'll share a link following today's webinar with everyone. We also do promote entrepreneurship and self-employment. We actually have a page dedicated on our website to self-advocate owned businesses. So if you're ever looking for any goodies or ways to support the community, definitely check out that page. Private sector engagement is another portion of this, where we are engaging with companies and businesses and talking to them about the benefits of hiring individuals with Down syndrome. Affiliate support is another area of NDSS broadly, but also the employment program specifically, in terms of providing support to the local Down syndrome affiliates. There are a number of affiliates, and there's probably one in your state, or possibly even in your local community. And last but not least, highlighting successes is a huge portion of this. We know success will look different for everyone, but if you or a loved one would ever be interested in sharing a success story with us, I will put a link in the chat for everyone here and also include that in that follow-up email. But again, thank you all so much for being here, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. So right now, I would like to introduce or invite our speakers, our esteemed speakers, Dr. Lee and Dr. Wallace, to introduce themselves. So going to turn it over to Dr. Lee and Dr. Wallace.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy Lee. I'm a clinical psychologist and also an associate professor in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Drexel University. And I wanted to take a moment before we get started to thank NDSS for partnering with us. We're really excited to be here today to tell you about Project Aspire.
Thanks, Nancy. Hi, my name is Gregory Wallace. I'm an applied developmental psychologist and an associate professor at the George Washington University in the Department of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences. So today we're going to be talking about the importance of employment and other engaging daytime activities for adults with Down syndrome. I want to start by thanking everyone for being here. We're of course thrilled to be sharing with you some preliminary results from our research study called Project Aspire. Prior to talking more about the study in detail, we will provide you with background on why we have elected to focus our research on employment and other engaging daytime activities like volunteerism for adults with Down syndrome. In this introduction, we'll briefly summarize prior research that makes the case for the importance of vocational activities for healthy aging among all adults. We will then summarize what prior research on employment among individuals with Down syndrome has taught us and what gaps in knowledge still exist. This will lead into our synopsis of some preliminary findings from our research, Project Aspire. We will close by telling you more about opportunities to get involved with the research, provide a couple of practical takeaways based on our findings so far, and answer any questions you might have about this important topic. So a basic starting point might be asking the question, why should we study employment in Down syndrome? An obvious first answer to this question is that paid employment allows people with Down syndrome to earn a living and increases the possibility that they achieve financial independence. However, we would like to take not only a short-term view to answering this question, but also a long-term view. We frame this around the notion of aging well or healthy aging. Aging well is taking care of your mind and body as you get older to optimize your chances for a happy and healthy life. Employment, whether paid or voluntary, is an important contributor to aging well for everyone, including people with Down syndrome. Thus, I want to highlight 3 areas around which employment can promote aging well. So let's start with the social benefits. Community engagement, including being employed, provides opportunities for social interaction, building social networks, and acquiring skills that can contribute to aging well. This social engagement, in turn, has been linked to better cognitive function, emotional well-being, and overall health in older adults. There are also cognitive benefits to employment that are part of aging well. In aging research, there is the concept of cognitive reserve, which is the ability to maintain cognitive function despite age-related changes in brain structure and function. Employment often involves continuous learning and skill development, which can enhance cognitive function and promote cognitive reserve. More to the point, lifelong learning, as is experienced on the job and in other community settings, has been associated with a lower risk of cognitive decline and a higher likelihood of aging well. Finally, there are mental health benefits to employment. Employment provides individuals an opportunity to develop a sense of purpose, accomplishment, and self-worth. Vocational engagement and being productive can contribute to a positive self-image and higher self-esteem, which in turn can have a positive impact on mental well-being. Employment often involves interacting with coworkers, supervisors, and customers, which can foster social connections and a sense of belonging. These social interactions can combat isolation and loneliness, which are risk factors for poor mental health. Finally, paid employment can increase financial stability, which can in turn reduce stress and anxiety related to financial concerns. So another basic question that we could ask or consider is, what do we know about employment for people with Down syndrome? The largest study to date in the United States was completed by Livy Kuhlman and Lisa Schoenbrot. This online study examined paid and unpaid employment experiences among 511 adults with Down syndrome who were 18 to 61 years old. Almost a quarter of participants were less than 22 years old, meaning that many participants were still in high school. Overall, they found that almost 60% of these adults had some type of paid employment, though keep in mind that the setting and number of hours worked varied widely. 11% of these adults with Down syndrome were volunteering only, and 30% of these adults were unemployed. Now, when focusing on the 59% of adults with Down syndrome who were engaged in paid employment, we can see here in this pie chart that nearly everyone is working only part-time. More specifically, only 2% of these adults were working 30 or more hours per week, while nearly half of them were working less than 10 hours per week for pay. So taking a step back again, let's now flip the question on its head. What don't we know about employment for adults with Down syndrome? We could answer this question in many, many ways, but one area Dr. Raytana Lee and I are particularly focused on is the need for new approaches to optimize employment outcomes. Prior approaches focused primarily on promoting skill development catered to a particular job. Instead, we are interested in fostering cognitive skills and optimizing mental health, given their importance for successful employment. Therefore, our research is starting from the ground up by investigating whether cognitive skills like executive function and mental health, such as anxiety symptoms, are linked to employment outcomes and thus can be areas around which future interventions are developed. Executive function is an umbrella term for a set of mental skills that help us plan, organize, and manage our daily lives effectively. They are not needed for one particular task, but instead are critical for many of our daily activities across circumstances and contexts. Here I've highlighted 3 areas of executive function. The first is inhibitory control, or the ability to put on the brakes, so to speak, mentally, such as not grabbing a cupcake, but maybe having fruit instead for dessert. Another area is cognitive flexibility, or being able to switch between tasks. For example, if you're doing a task and you're interrupted by a peer or your boss, how well can you resume that task? Lastly, there's working memory, or being able to attend to and hold information in mind for later use. So, for example, might you have difficulty following multi-step instructions needed to complete a task? Another broad area we're focused on is mental health. More specifically, we're interested in the influence that anxiety, depression, and hyperactivity symptoms might have on vocational activities among adults with Down syndrome. These mental health symptoms have been linked to daily living skills in children with Down syndrome in prior research. Therefore, they are likely important for vocational outcomes in adults too. I will now turn the mic over to Dr. Raytana Lee, who will tell you more about Project Aspire.
Right. Well, I'm so pleased to tell you about Project Aspire. This is an online national study about vocational outcomes among young adults with Down syndrome. This project was funded by the National Institutes of Health in 2021 via the INCLUDE initiative. INCLUDE, which stands for Investigation of Co-occurring Conditions Across the Lifespan to Understand Down Syndrome, is a trans NIH initiative. We were fortunate to receive funding for Project Aspire from the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, also known as NICHD. Okay, so now I'd like to provide more detail about the study. We are inviting family members of young adults with Down syndrome to fill out surveys online. The immediate goal of the project is to describe the daily activities of 200 young adults with Down syndrome, as well as cognitive and mental health factors that predict greater engagement in the community, including employment. Looking to the future, it is our hope that this study will provide the foundation necessary to develop more effective approaches to support and optimize vocational outcomes for adults with Down syndrome. Currently, 54 families have participated in Project Aspire. Our goal, though, is 200 families, so we are only a quarter of the way there. We need a larger group of participants to adequately capture the diversity of families' experiences. This, in turn, will allow us to identify factors such as executive function and mental health that predict more favorable outcomes. In the slides that follow, I will review the study's preliminary findings. However, if you'd like to learn more, please scan this QR code or send us an email at ladder_lab@drexel.edu. Someone from our team will then reach out with further information. So what have we learned so far? We will start by telling you a bit about the participants with Down syndrome enrolled in this study to date, and then describe their vocational activities. So as stated previously, 54 families have participated thus far. The average age of the adults with Down syndrome is 27 years. About half of the participants are male and half are female. So now we'll turn to vocational activities. As pictured here, about half of the participants are engaged in paid employment, just under 20% are volunteering in their community, and about 35% are not currently employed. So the pattern results we have found thus far, which is presented on the left, is similar to that of the larger scale study Dr. Wallace described earlier in the presentation, in which the vocational activities of 511 adults with Down syndrome were described in 2016. The results from that study are presented on the right for comparison. Next, we turn to hours worked. Of the 26 participants engaged in paid employment, the vast majority are working 20 hours per week or less, and no participants are working greater than 30 hours per week in our small sample. 30 hours per week is considered by some to be full-time or close to full-time employment. Again, the pattern of our findings presented on the left is similar to that found in the 2016 study, which again is presented on the right. However, in that study, a larger proportion of participants were working for less than 10 hours per week. This may be due to the fact that they included participants who were still in high school and thus could not work a greater number of hours. In the analyses I'm showing you here, we have limited our participants to be 22 years of age and older, so out of high school. So now we'll spend the remainder of our presentation describing two things. One, we will describe the types of vocational activities in which participants with Down syndrome are engaged. And two, we will present a preview of our findings on cognitive and mental health predictors of paid work in the community. Okay, so first though, let's get a bit more granular with regard to the types of vocational activities completed by study participants. In this graph, we present the breakdown of participants who are completing paid community employment, paid employment in workshops for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, volunteerism, or a combination of these activities. As can be seen, nearly half of our sample is participating in multiple vocational activities, both paid and unpaid. A quarter are engaged in paid community employment only. 5% are engaged in paid workshop settings only, and a quarter are volunteering only. Okay, so next we will narrow our focus to participants engaged in paid community employment. This is the type of employment that is perceived by many to be the most desirable, as it permits integration into the larger community and also provides market level compensation. However, before doing so, I wanted to highlight some of the impressive volunteer work by the participants. For example, people reported volunteering in a wide variety of settings, including churches, dance studios, flower shops, community food pantries, and both fire and police departments. Okay, so now for the 23 participants engaged in paid employment in the community, families reported jobs in varied settings, from jobs in grocery stores to restaurants to childcare facilities. Examples of other settings reported include employment in retail shops, as well as educational, arts, and healthcare settings. At these paid community jobs, parents reported different supports that were provided to their family member with Down syndrome. The most frequent of these was having a job coach and receiving on-the-job training. A few participants reported receiving supports via their state vocational rehabilitation office, as well as support from mentors and family members. Okay, so now we come to the question of what predicts greater hours of paid community work. As a reminder, the primary goal of Project Aspire is to increase our understanding of cognitive and mental health factors that are associated with more favorable vocational outcomes for adults with Down syndrome. Thus, we provide a first look at findings focused on cognitive and mental health factors related to hours of paid work in the community. Keep in mind that these findings are preliminary and we are only a quarter of a way to meeting our goal of enrolling 200 families in the study. With this caveat in mind, we investigated parent ratings of different aspects of cognition as well as mental health. These are listed on this slide. So of the 16 associations we examined, we highlight the top 3 factors that were associated with greater hours of paid community work. One of these factors is an aspect of executive function, and 2 are aspects of mental health. So first, we found that one aspect of executive function, namely working memory skills, was associated with a greater number of hours worked in the community each week. As a reminder, working memory skills involve actively maintaining information in the focus of one's attention to complete a task. Okay, second, in the realm of mental health, we found that the more that adults with Down syndrome could concentrate, pay attention, and focus, the more hours they worked for pay in the community each week. Finally, the third factor also related to mental health. Specifically, we found that greater amounts of calm behavior, or conversely, lower levels of anxiety, were associated with a greater number of hours worked in the community each week. So now I'd like to take a moment to summarize. So thus far in Project Aspire, we've found the following. So more than half of the participants included thus far were working for pay or volunteering in their community. However, the vast majority of participants were engaged in these activities part-time. As for the settings where these individuals worked or volunteered, they were varied. Our first look at the findings from Project Aspire suggested that stronger working memory skills, as well as higher levels of attentive and calm behavior, are associated with greater hours worked in the community. However, we want to highlight the fact that these findings were based on a small group of individuals and also have not yet been submitted for peer review, which is an important aspect of the scientific process to ensure robust research findings. Because these findings were based on only 1/4 of the participants we would like to include in Project Aspire, we need your help to meet our goal of 200 families participating in the research. So please consider signing up so that we can adequately capture the diversity of experiences and perspectives of a large group of families with a loved one with Down syndrome. So before I reintroduce Dr. Wallace to share a few practical takeaway points from Project Aspire, I am again sharing information about how you can get involved with the project using the QR code above or by emailing us. Thank you so much for your consideration of this invitation to participate. I will now turn the mic over to Dr. Wallace.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. So to complement the preliminary findings we've shown today, we wanted to provide a couple of practical takeaways. The first practical takeaway focuses on working memory accommodations. Prior research indicates that working memory is often a challenge for people with Down syndrome, and our findings in Project Aspire link better working memory skills with more hours worked for pay in the community. So how might we go about supporting people with Down syndrome who have working memory difficulties? One way is through providing accommodations. Working memory accommodations are like recipes in that visual instructions, often in combination with text-based or verbal instructions, are incredibly helpful. Thus, visual schedules are a frequently used tool to help offset working memory challenges for people with Down syndrome. The next slide provides an example of a visual schedule. This prototypical visual schedule includes instructions with words and pictures arranged in a step-by-step manner to describe how to go about weeding your garden or yard. It starts from the very beginning, that is, gathering the needed supplies and where to find them, and proceeds to the process of weeding itself before ending with repeating these steps as needed. Many visual schedules will also include cleanup steps and instructions, unlike the example provided here. The second practical takeaway focuses on some of the vocational support systems in place in the United States. Many of you are likely well aware of some, if not all, of these programs. However, we wanted to make sure everyone was aware of two of the most commonly accessed government-funded adult service programs related to daytime activities and employment for people with disabilities. The first of these is Home and Community-Based Services, or HCBS, waiver programs via Medicaid, which vary by state. See the included links on this slide for access to more detailed information. Second, and also state-dependent, are vocational rehabilitation, or VR programs. VR programs provide services for job development, placement, and coaching. Again, a link is provided for accessing more detailed information. Finally, another well-known program is Project Search, which provides employability training and real-life work experience for young adults with developmental disabilities to launch them into competitive employment. So I just want to conclude our portion of the talk by expressing our gratitude for your attention and interest in this topic. So we're now happy to answer any questions you might have. And after we've finished fielding questions, there'll be a few final remarks by NDSS staff.
This is Ryan Rotundo with the National Down Syndrome Society. Once again, just jumping in, I want to say thank you so much to Dr. Lee and Dr. Wallace for joining us and sharing this incredible information that they have been collecting and continue to collect. You heard a little bit of a call to action there. If you are someone interested in being a part of this research, they have listed their contact information. We'll make sure to get that to you all again. But want to see if we have any questions from our audience. It appears that we have a few in the chat at the moment. It says, other than advocating for families to sign up, is there any other way that we could get involved or help with this study?
All right. Well, I mean, I think that, those would be, certainly the most important ways, because I think what we hope to express today, in addition to sharing what we hope is helpful information with you, is that we really are only a quarter of our way to our goal of describing a really large sample of people with Down syndrome. And it's really important to us that we provide a diverse diverse perspectives of families. And so in order to do that, we really do need more people to sign up. I'm trying to think, Dr. Wallace, do you have thoughts about other ways that folks could contribute or help out?
I mean, for me personally, I think it's always nice to hear from families, to hear about research priorities as well. Keeping in mind that we are researchers and we can only indirectly impact things like policy. I just point this out because I don't want families to come to us and think that we can affect change immediately, but more we're interested in where research should go. I mean, I'm guessing that Ryan would echo this, that our knowledge of employment and Down syndrome is relatively impoverished. And so we have a lot of directions in which we can go, which is why I said that in that slide, like, what don't we know? Well, good Lord, I could have given multiple talks on just that answer, what we don't know. But I think it's really important to speak to the stakeholders, the central stakeholders, meaning people with Down syndrome and their families and caregivers, to tell us what the priorities are for what we should be focused on. I don't know if that's helpful, Dr. Lee, but
I guess the only other thing I'll mention is that one of the things that has been incredible about doing the project so far has been learning about the different experiences and organizations where some of the participants work. We've had just really great success hearing about really original programs in the community involving work on farms, florists, really sort of neat ways to provide integrated community employment. And so one way that, I think people could help out is really just sharing your knowledge of different programs out there. We'd love to learn more about them, to connect with them. One of our goals of this project is really just to get more integrated into the community, to learn more about the everyday lives of people with Down syndrome in the workplace.
I think those are some great ways to stay connected and continue to build our awareness in this space. There's some other questions that I want to just touch on here. One is, can you provide guidance on early intervention programs, educational resources, and support groups available for families of individuals with Down syndrome? I will just, I guess I'll turn it over to our presenters and see if you have any particular thoughts on this question, and then I can certainly share some information from the National Down Syndrome Society perspective.
I can start by saying, certainly your home school district is a really, really important resource for families to get connected with services from well before the age at which children typically enter school. So I would say that would be sort of your number one resource to consider. I think that, we are learning more about different types of early interventions or different types of, let's say, speech and language therapy supports that can be helpful for people with Down syndrome. But I think that some of the research studies are too preliminary to provide concrete resources right now for things that you can access in the community. But I guess I will maybe turn it back over to Ryan, but just reiterate that, you know, your school, your home school district should be a good resource to you for early intervention and then ultimately school-based supports.
Absolutely. So I think that's definitely a great connection. And I will say too, just a plug for, you know, the different resources and information that we have available through the National Down Syndrome Society. I would highly suggest that folks take a look at our local support page, which identifies one or more of the more than 250 local Down syndrome affiliate organizations that are connecting, you know, folks within their communities all across the country. So these are organizations that, you know, maybe serve different functions in different areas. The National Down Syndrome Society is not a membership organization per se, but these are local groups that do focus on Down syndrome and create community. That was mentioned earlier. I think that's a very strong and powerful way to get information and to share lived experience. So these local Down syndrome affiliates might look slightly different from one city to the next or one state to the next, but there's certainly ways to get connected to other families, resources, again, shared experience, lived experience, that could be a very powerful connection. And I see some folks on the webinar who may actually be representing a local or statewide Down syndrome affiliate. So be sure to check out our website there. And then just in general, I would say, you know, through social media, the National Down Syndrome Society is live on all social media platforms. So if you wanted to follow us, we do action alerts when it comes to policy. We do education updates. We do all sorts of connection tools and things throughout the year. We also have a newsletter that we circulate, some specific to policy, but also just more general information. So I think those would be some really great ways for folks to get connected there. Another question that has come up is, what are some available therapies for managing the health and development challenges associated with Down syndrome? I would say, obviously, this varies, right, based on the need of the individual. Again, Dr. Lee mentioned school-based supports. I will share that I was a special education instructor for 10 years in the state of North Carolina, and just really appreciated the specialists and the individuals that I saw working with students that I had Down syndrome within the school setting. So occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, some physical therapy involved at different in different areas for students that needed that. So those are some of the therapies that may be involved if you're looking, again, for school-based or even in-home type services and supports. So those are some that I would mention, but I don't know if our guests would like to share any others.
I'm guessing is the question focused just more generally upon therapies to support? I mean, I guess what I would say is I would, you know, underscore the resources that Ryan mentioned, and you know, certainly I think working closely with, if your child is in school or if they're out of school, with their healthcare team, with their educators to make a coordinated plan of care, so that everyone's on the same page with different therapies. Those would be my recommendations.
Yeah, that's a great point. We need to obviously have consideration for where we are in the lifespan. It's an important piece to pull out.
And in terms of these last two questions, I can quickly try to lump them together, if that would be helpful, just to say that it's a great point. Jennifer Gray asks about executive functioning, its importance, not just here in, let's call it, young adulthood, but beyond. Whether it's earlier in development or let's even say later in development, and the answer would be yes, absolutely. And there have been some programs, Dr. Lee can add to or correct me if I'm wrong. There have been some programs, I wouldn't say that particularly for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in general, not specifically Down syndrome. However, I wouldn't say they've been implemented much in the community. They've been more, they've been developed on the research side and haven't been sort of put out in the community. There are more generic ones. I don't know how often they have folks with IDD in them, like Tools of the Mind, which are catered to other populations. But I think the answer to the question is absolutely. And the goal here is we are really, really, really at the beginning, because the point here is to establish these relationships between executive function, and we also talked about mental health, those connections with vocational activities of various sorts. We just looked at one here because we have very limited time for the presentation and we're at the beginning of this study. But the idea is you establish this relationship and we establish it downstream so that we can show that this is a good place to intervene, meaning we try to bolster or support these executive function skills to then improve vocational and other outcomes, if that makes sense. But we're really early on, and this gets to that second question about related clinical trials, in that I don't know of any that are very, very, very related to this for Down syndrome, but of course there are other clinical trials that are likely ongoing. If you want to look for government funded ones that are just more generic, not necessarily related to executive function or these topics, you could look on, isn't it just clinicaltrials.gov? Isn't that what it's called, Dr. Lee? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add, Dr. Lee. I know I'm rambling. I'm sorry, Ryan.
No, I think that's wonderful. Thank you.
That was a good question and good response. Trying to see if there are any questions that we missed, or maybe an opportunity for someone to ask a question who's been holding on to one.
Someone had a question about what are other strategies to help working memory. Should we try to address that one, or is there another one that you hoped we could talk about, Ryan?
Sure. No, go ahead and let's take that one, Dr. Lee. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, one of the things we know about strategies to support working memory is there are different approaches. One approach may be focused on more internal, so sort of focused on learning skills to improve an area that's challenging for you. So if we're talking about working memory, sort of things that you can do internally. I'll explain that in just one second. The other is these external aids, which is what Dr. Wallace presented. So if you're having a hard time keeping information that you need for a particular task in mind, let's take that sort of burden off of you and let's have something visual to help remind you of the steps. Now, if we think about these more internal approaches, I would say that things related to repetition. So for example, in the example we provided with the weeding, over time with repetition, that becomes sort of like a more automatic task. And so in the end, it's less taxing on your working memory. So I would say repeating particular sort of series of actions or whatever it might be could be helpful in terms of essentially reducing the active memory demands and really helping someone to execute these multi-step tasks more effectively. I don't know, Dr. Wallace, do you have thoughts about other working memory types of accommodations?
I don't. The only thing that occurs to me is not in scope of practice. I do wonder, for example, and I don't know the research on the trials, but even how some medications may improve, let's say, attention, and because they improve attention, let's say medications for ADHD may have downstream impacts on working memory. I don't know the answer to that. That's the only other thing that occurs to me.
All right. Well, I do see one other comment here, and I think it's one that we can maybe all relate to, and I'm sure there are a variety of ways to sort of respond to this. But one of our participants today writes that my son has had several different job opportunities in a small community. The problem is that they all they ever let him do is clean. It seems there are safety concerns, even though he is always with a job coach. How do I combat this limitation? He is capable of doing so much more. And that is something that, again, as a special education teacher, even as the younger sibling to someone with Down syndrome, I have witnessed and seen many times in my life. And it's that sort of that bigotry of low expectation, right? It's overcoming that hurdle and being able to help someone shift that paradigm, or help an organization even shift that paradigm into understanding that individuals with Down syndrome and other disabilities are capable of maybe much more than originally expected or understood. That is the great work before us, I think. And that is why this research can be incredibly helpful. That's why your advocacy can be incredibly helpful. That's why, as parents, professionals, individuals, stakeholders, we need to make sure that we are helping teachers, other professionals, job coaches even, and employers raise their standard or raise their bar of expectation around what an individual with Down syndrome or another disability is capable of. So I would say to that, please continue to do that. Join us, the National Down Syndrome Society, join this research team, and help us, continue to spread that message, that awareness, that advocacy around the fact that individuals with Down syndrome are very capable of achieving their vocational or other employment goals, and that we just need to continue to give them the opportunity or create a space for those opportunities to grow. I don't know if anyone would like to add to that, but that's a little bit of a Ryan Rotundoism, maybe more so than a full response there.
I thought that was great because, unfortunately, I think you're right. I mean, you did it in a nice, positive way, Ryan, but I think that advocacy often falls on the family members. And what that means is, sometimes it's pushing the service providers, but sometimes it's pushing either the service providers or themselves making connections with employers and finding employers who are willing to do more. And it's amazing. I've seen, again, like the in-between, the families, the service providers here, and the employers. And I've seen the service providers make bigger outreach to more employers and actually find out that a lot more employers are open to more possibilities. And I think, unfortunately, I think embedded in that question was a possible limitation that's inherent to where you live. It's a small community, which I think probably limits not just for people with Down syndrome, but everybody, the employer possibilities. But it'd be interesting to see if one can reach out to various employers, particularly if there's someone somewhere that the adult with Down syndrome wants to work, to try something out. But I'm not trying to be negative. I'm actually trying to say, just brainstorm different possibilities, because that's what I've seen work in disability space before. It's annoying, but just keep trying at various levels.
And I will go back to sort of where we started as we wrap up our webinar today, and that is, again, why research and understanding employment for people with Down syndrome is so important. We do use this information, the data, understanding kind of this perspective in some of the policy work that we do. The National Down Syndrome Society makes a point to partner with for-profit organizations, businesses, employers all across the country, and even some global, around this concept of inclusive hiring practices. So you will note later this year in the month of October, which is, of course, Down Syndrome Awareness Month, but also National Disability Employment Awareness Month, we will increase our focus on connecting with employers, speaking to employee resource groups, talking to C-suite executives around how to really set the tone and culture of their organizations to be more inclusive in their hiring practices, focusing specifically on including individuals with Down syndrome in the workforce. So again, we do a lot of different things within our organization. I see several folks in the chat here from Gigi's Playhouse, another great organization that we partner with. They have some incredible programs. We'll be at their conference later this year. But really, partnering with other Down syndrome organizations, national nonprofits, and again, these for-profit companies around this idea of inclusive hiring practices. So, today we're speaking on the topic of research and sharing some of these key pieces and how it sort of folds into our greater mission. But then there are some other angles to how we're, really trying to increase awareness and, reduce these limitations or these barriers to employment for individuals with Down syndrome. So with that, I believe we are kind of coming up on our time here, and let's go ahead and get to our next slide, just a few little pieces. Want to make a quick note to some other ways that individuals on this call, and if you want to share this information, please again, visit our website. But we want to make note of other ways that individuals can get involved with the National Down Syndrome Society. This is a program that we launched last year. It is our 3-2-1-GO program, which is a guide for adults with Down syndrome who want to learn about and improve their personal health and well-being, right? This is a very whole person focused program. I say program, it's a lifestyle. This is an opportunity for individuals to really build healthy habits, everything from balanced nutrition to emotional wellness and even fitness and physical activity components. So a very powerful tool here that again will help contribute to a greater and positive quality of life. So that is one thing that we offer, and I'll ask us to go to the next slide here. And another opportunity again is through our Adult Summit. So in November, it is the 9th through the 11th in Cincinnati, Ohio. We'll be hosting an Adult Summit, which will be a large conference with several different tracks focusing, of course, on employment, on finance, education, health, wellness, and some others. Would love to see all of you there. We hope to have more on our research and some other areas of study around employment and different parts of life for individuals with Down syndrome. So please, again, visit our website. We'll have some information and links that you all can follow in the next couple of slides. But I want to just mention our Adult Summit again, November 9th through the 11th in Cincinnati, Ohio. So take a look on our website for that and other ways to engage. We'll go to the last slide here. And and then after our webinar concludes here in just a few moments, we ask that you would just take our brief survey to give us a little bit of feedback on sort of what you've heard, but then also what you'd like to hear. We really want to make sure that we continue to bring information to the community that is of value and that we feel like is meeting the needs of those that we serve. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate your attendance. Again, if you would like to reach out, I would ask Dr. Lee and Dr. Wallace to put any contact information that you would like for your website or the study in the chat, and our technical support team will do the same. And then, of course, employment@ndss.org if you have follow-up questions. And we ask again that you would take that post survey to give us a little bit of feedback. And again, we hope to see you at the Adult Summit. Thank you all so much for joining our webinar today. And thank you again to our guests and our presenters, Dr. Lee and Dr. Wallace. We really appreciate you all being here and bringing this great research to life.
Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you all, everyone. We're going to go ahead and close out today's webinar. Again, this will be posted on the NDSS YouTube channel and page. So be on the lookout for a post follow-up email with those links and the other resources Dr. Lee and Dr. Wallace mentioned today. So thank you all again so much for being here and hope you enjoyed today's webinar. Everyone have a good one. Thank you.